I should have known it would catch up to me sooner or later. 15 years of marriage and I'd let myself go. Now that the divorce was finalized, I couldn't look in the mirror without feeling disgusted at the man staring back. Bloated, tired, weak. At my recent doctor's appointment, my doctor didn't sugarcoat it either. "Todd, you're pre-diabetic." I could hear his voice, clinical and matter-of-fact. Change or die. Those were my options. That's how the walking started. The park was perfect. Quiet. Isolated. A place where I could be alone, far from the judgmental stares of anyone who remembered who I used to be. And the trails? Endless. I found a path no one else seemed to use, far enough off the beaten track that I hadn't seen a soul in weeks. 4 miles out, 4 miles back. Every evening, like clockwork. But tonight, I'd started late. The sky was already dimming when I parked. Not a big deal, I told myself. It's a straight trail. What could go wrong? I set off, the woods already swallowing me up. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel was a comfort, grounding me as the sun sank below the horizon. But the deeper I went, the darker it got. I should have turned back sooner, should have trusted that instinct in my gut. But something was pulling me forward. Something in the air felt different tonight, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I saw it. A light. At first, I thought maybe it was a campfire, but who would camp all the way out here? It was too far off the trail, too deep in the woods. Still, it flickered in the distance, and before I knew it, my feet had left the path. I didn't think, I just moved. The brush was thicker than I expected, branches clawing at my sleeves, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I kept telling myself I'd stop if it got too dark, that I'd turn around at any moment. But the light kept pulling me. It looked close, just ahead, but no matter how far I went, it stayed out of reach. 15 minutes of stumbling through the undergrowth, and I crested a hill, breathless. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. It was real. Too real. 30 or more hooded figures, standing in a perfect circle around a roaring bonfire. I crouched low, heart pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. The fire cast long shadows over the clearing, and in front of it, a stone altar loomed, with 3 burlap sacks draped across it. Motionless. The blood drained from my face as I watched. 6 more robed figures emerged from the darkness, walking in unison toward the altar. They moved with purpose, like this was something they'd done 1,000 times before. And then the chanting started. I've heard Latin before. Hell, I took a few years of it in college. But this wasn't Latin. It wasn't any language I'd ever heard. The sound was guttural, unnatural, like it was scraping out from the depths of something old and terrible. My skin crawled, and I had to bite down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. The chanting seemed to wrap around my brain, squeezing until my head throbbed. I should have run, but I didn't. The chanting stopped suddenly, like a switch being flipped. The figures all dropped to their knees in unison. Then, the one in the red robe, different from the others, rose. He was unusually tall. My breath hitched. He moved slowly, methodically, circling the altar 6 times before stopping in front of it. And then, the sacks moved. Something alive was inside them. My stomach churned as the red-robed figure pulled a dagger from beneath his robe, the firelight gleaming off its edge. He raised it high, then brought it down into the first burlap sack. A muffled cry came from inside, something alive, something human. The figure stabbed again and again, the sack growing darker with blood. He lifted the sack and tossed it into the fire. I gagged. I could taste my dinner rising in my throat, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The other 2 sacks met the same fate. Stabbed, tossed into the flames, consumed by the roaring fire. The smell hit me next, a foul stench of burning flesh that made my head swim. I thought I might pass out right there. Then the fire changed. The orange flames turned a deep, unnatural blue, then white, so bright it hurt to look at. From the flames, something shifted. A dark mass, swirling, growing. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was alive. It started to take shape, something vaguely human but grotesque, wrong. Its limbs twisted, its head too large, its face. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me. The flames turned black. That's when my legs gave out. I fell hard, sending rocks tumbling down the hill. The noise was deafening in the silence of the clearing. Every hooded figure snapped their head toward me. The fire, those black flames, seemed to pulse as if it was aware. Then, from somewhere deep and terrible, a voice thundered, "Capture him." My body reacted before my brain did. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my ears, and ran. My lungs screamed for air. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Branches slapped my face, my hands, but I kept running, stumbling through the dark like a madman. The pain in my side was unbearable, like someone had driven a hot knife between my ribs. My legs were jelly, trembling under the weight of my own body, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. If I did, I knew they'd catch me. I knew what they'd do. The woods were pitch black now, just shadows and snarled branches that seemed to reach out for me. My arms and face were covered in scratches, my shirt clinging to my skin, soaked with sweat. Every breath felt like I was inhaling shards of glass. The footsteps behind me, those goddamn footsteps, were growing louder. I could hear them moving through the underbrush, steady, deliberate. Good Lord, they weren't even running. I stumbled again, my foot catching on something hidden beneath the leaves. I went down hard, face first into the dirt, my arms barely catching me before my head slammed into the ground. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Just a moment of paralyzing pain that shot through my body like electricity. I tasted blood in my mouth. I couldn't stay here. I had to get up. I pushed myself up with trembling arms, gasping for breath, feeling the world tilt on its axis. I couldn't even tell which way I was going anymore, just away. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees into the thick bushes. My muscles screamed in protest, but I ignored it, dragging myself forward, praying the brush would hide me for a few seconds. I lay there, chest heaving, heart pounding so loud I thought it might explode. I was too loud. Too loud. The footsteps were so close now, closer than they should have been. I knew they could hear me. How could they not? My breath was like a goddamn foghorn, echoing through the trees. I gripped a thick branch next to me, something heavy enough to swing if it came to that. If they found me, it was my only shot. I wasn't going down without a fight. I heard one of them, closer now, just a few yards away, the sound of their robes swishing against the foliage, the crack of twigs underfoot. I froze, trying to control my breathing, fighting to keep the noise inside my chest. Every part of me screamed to bolt, but my body couldn't take it anymore. I'd never been in shape, and now I was paying for it. Then, without warning, a hand clamped down on my arm, yanking me upright. I swung the branch without thinking, pure survival taking over. The thud of it hitting something solid reverberated through my arms, and the hooded figure stumbled, groaning from beneath the dark cowl. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't enough. I swung again, harder this time, grunting from the effort. The branch connected with the figure's skull with a dull crack. It dropped to one knee but didn't fall. It was like fighting a nightmare, something too surreal to be happening. Blood, thick and dark, started pooling under the hood, dripping onto the forest floor. One more swing. I had to. The third hit did it. The figure collapsed, motionless, crumpled at my feet, blood glistening in the dim light. I was panting so hard I couldn't see straight, every part of me trembling. I didn't care. I dropped the branch, wiped at the blood on my hands, and staggered back. I'd killed someone. Jesus. I think I killed him. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I turned and ran, my legs barely carrying me. I was dizzy, my vision swimming in and out, the darkness feeling thicker, heavier around me. I'd thought I could handle this, thought I could outrun them, but every step felt like a war inside my own body. My lungs screamed, and my thighs burned with each agonizing movement. I was falling apart. That's when I saw the firelight flickering through the trees. A camp. People. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping for air, nearly tripping over a log as I broke into the light. My knees almost gave out as I saw them, a young couple, sitting beside their fire, looking at me like I'd just stepped out of the woods covered in blood. Because I had. "Help! Please! You have to help me!" My voice was raw, barely more than a raspy cry. The guy stood up immediately, throwing an arm out in front of the girl who had shot up behind him. He was tall, lean, probably in his mid-20s, and fit, judging by the way he held himself, like he wasn't afraid. His face was confused but calm, like he was trying to figure out if I was some kind of lunatic. "Whoa, man. Slow down. What's going on?" His voice was even, but I could see the tension in his eyes, his body bracing. I shook my head violently, trying to force the words out. They're coming for me. There's a group of them, hooded figures, rituals. They killed people. The guy glanced at the girl, who was wide-eyed, her hands over her mouth. He looked back at me with a frown, not sure whether to believe me. "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" The words were a mess, stumbling out too fast, too garbled, but I couldn't stop. My hands were shaking. "They're killing people. They're sacrificing people." "All right, man. Just breathe," he said, still holding his hands up like he was calming down a stray dog. "Are you sure you're not just lost or something? You sound..." Snap. The sound of a branch breaking echoed through the woods behind us. My heart stopped. The girl turned, her face pale. The guy's eyes flicked to the darkness, his posture stiffening. "Who the hell is out there?" he muttered, grabbing a flashlight from his pack. He clicked it on, pointing it into the woods. The beam cut through the night, but all it revealed were the trees, twisted, looming shadows. I could hear them. I could hear the footsteps. The same deliberate, heavy footfalls I'd been running from. "They're coming," I whispered. My throat was dry, the words barely audible. "They're coming." The girl backed up, her voice shaking. "What is he talking about? Who's coming?" The guy was trying to stay calm, but I could see the shift in his face, the way his eyes scanned the tree line, the way his jaw clenched. He turned to the girl, opening his mouth to say something, but I didn't hear it. I couldn't. I turned and ran. I had only made it maybe 50 yards when I heard them start screaming behind me. Their shouts turned to cries, the girl's voice rising into a terrified shriek that sent shivers down my spine. The guy's voice joined hers, a deep, guttural shout. I heard something awful, a wet thud that seemed to stop their screams in an instant. My legs kept moving, my lungs burning with every step. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. The pain was blinding now, my sides screaming with every breath, every step. It felt like someone was stabbing me over and over, but I forced myself onward. I couldn't stop. My legs were giving out, my body barely responding to the commands I was giving it. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to give in, but I couldn't. Then, just ahead, I saw it. A break in the trees. A trail. I stumbled onto it, collapsing against the ground, the rough gravel scraping my hands. I could barely breathe, my chest heaving, the world spinning in and out of focus. But the trail was real. I wasn't imagining it. I had to get up. I pushed myself to my feet, every muscle in my body shaking, but I forced myself upright. I was so close. The parking lot had to be nearby. If I could just get to my car, I'd be safe. I started moving again, my steps slow and heavy, each one a battle. Every few seconds I'd hear a noise, footsteps, a branch breaking. But I forced myself to ignore it. I was so close. So close. The trail opened up into the parking lot. I almost cried. But I wasn't safe yet. I could see 2 figures moving through the lot, their flashlights sweeping over the cars. Park rangers? Nope. I couldn't take that chance. I ducked and made my way to the nearby dumpsters where I'd parked to hide my car earlier. I had parked away from the main lot, hoping to avoid a ticket for staying after hours without a camping permit. Now, that decision may have saved my life. I crouched low, moving toward my car as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the keys. The second I unlocked the door, I knew the lights would flash and give me away. 1, 2, 3. I hit the button, dove inside, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and the headlights flooded the parking lot. The figures turned toward me, their faces illuminated in the beam, hooded robes. They were waiting for me. "Not this time," I muttered, my voice shaking as I threw the car into drive. The tires squealed as I floored the gas, speeding toward the exit. 4 more hooded figures appeared, trying to block me, their arms outstretched as if they thought I'd stop. I wasn't stopping. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and slammed my foot down on the gas. The engine roared, and the car surged forward, barreling straight for the hooded figures standing at the exit. My heart was racing, my mind screaming at me to stop, to swerve, but I wasn't going to. Not after everything I'd seen. The first figure dove out of the way just in time, rolling into the dirt. The second wasn't so lucky. I clipped them hard, feeling the car shudder as they hit the side and went spinning off into the darkness. There was no time to process it, no time to think about what I'd just done. I drove like a madman, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The speedometer hovered well above the limit, but I didn't care. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see those hooded figures, glowing eyes or black flames chasing after me. But all I saw was the empty dark road stretching behind me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I felt like I'd been running for years. My limbs were stiff with fear and exhaustion. The garage door creaked open, and I sped in, slamming the button to close it again the second I was inside. I sat there, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for the door to fully shut. Only when I heard it lock into place with a heavy clunk did I finally let out a long, trembling breath. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to calm the storm in my head. My body felt like it was vibrating from the adrenaline. Sweat clung to my skin, the fabric of my tracksuit sticking to me uncomfortably. The events of the night flashed in my mind. Those hooded figures, the chanting, the sax, the fire, the thing in the flames. I'd never forget that black fire. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car, my legs shaky and sore. My whole body felt wrecked, bruises forming on my arms and chest from where I'd fallen and scrambled in the woods. Each step was like walking on broken glass, my feet still raw from the desperate run. The house was dark when I stepped inside, the familiar scent of stale air and bourbon hitting me like a wave. I locked the door, bolting it, then checked the windows. I didn't trust the locks anymore, not after what I'd seen. I stumbled into the kitchen, almost collapsing onto a stool at the island. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed the bourbon bottle from the counter, pouring a generous amount into a glass. My fingers were slick with sweat and blood. Some of it mine, most of it probably not. The glass trembled in my hands as I lifted it to my lips and downed it in one go, the alcohol burning my throat. It didn't matter. I poured another. I sat there for a long time, staring blankly at the dark kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound keeping me anchored in reality. Half a bottle later, the tension in my chest started to ease. But the images wouldn't go away. The fire, the sax, the blood. the screaming, the thing that crawled out of the flames, watching me, knowing I was there. My stomach twisted, bile rising up, and I barely made it to the sink before I vomited everything. Dinner, bourbon, fear, into the drain. When I finally stumbled into bed, hours later, I felt numb, exhausted. My body ached, but my mind wouldn't stop. Sleep came in short bursts, visions of hooded figures closing in, that chanting, and the blood-soaked burlap sacks all replayed on an endless loop. I woke up gasping, the sheets tangled around me, drenched in sweat. The next morning, the world was too bright, too normal. For a split second, I thought maybe it had all been some horrific nightmare. But then I felt the bruises on my arms, saw the scratches across my knuckles, and the stiff ache in my legs. It was real. I had really seen those things. I had really killed someone. My body screamed as I dragged myself into the shower, each drop of water like a hammer hitting my sore muscles. I washed the blood and dirt off my skin, scrubbing harder than necessary. But no matter how much I cleaned, I couldn't shake the feeling of their eyes on me. The black flames, the cold, blank stares beneath those hoods. After getting dressed, I grabbed a banana smoothie from the fridge, trying to force some food down. My mind was still a blur, but one thought kept cutting through the fog. I needed to go to the police. I couldn't explain what had happened, not clearly, but I had to tell them something. Someone had to know what was going on in those woods. I grabbed my keys, walked into the garage, and started the car. The engine's low hum, the only sound in the quiet morning. I pulled out of the garage, the weight in my chest growing heavier. The closer I got to town, the more I realized how crazy it all sounded in my head. Hooded figures? Rituals in the woods? A black flame monster? They'd never believe me. Hell, I could barely believe it, and I'd been there. I was almost out of the driveway when I saw it. Something was taped to my front door. I slammed the brakes hard, staring at the envelope fluttering in the light breeze. My heart thudded in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. Slowly, I put the car in park and climbed out, my legs stiff, my breath coming in shallow gasps. As I approached the door, I saw the thick, dark stains smeared along the edges of the envelope. Blood. My stomach twisted into knots. My hand trembled as I pulled the envelope off the door and ripped it open. A note. Scrawled in jagged, frantic writing, in blood, were the words, "The Omen will follow." My heart sank into my stomach. They knew where I lived. They knew who I was. The message was clear. I hadn't escaped. I was still in this. I could still feel their eyes on me, the cold grip of fear tightening around my throat. I crushed the note in my fist, shoving it into my pocket, and backed away from the door, feeling exposed, vulnerable. The bright, sunny morning suddenly felt too quiet, too dangerous. They knew where I lived. They knew everything. There was no way I could go to the police now. Even if I tried, they'd be watching. They'd know. The hooded figures had seen me, and somehow they had followed me here. I wasn't safe, not in my house, not in this town. I had to leave. I rushed back inside, moving on instinct now. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, packing it with whatever essentials I could think of. Clothes, my laptop, papers, cash. I was still shaking, my mind racing with panic, but the thought kept repeating itself over and over. Get out. Get away. I booked a flight on my phone, my hands trembling, and called a storage facility to move my most important possessions there. I was lucky that my job was remote. I could leave, disappear, and no one would question it. I rented out my house on Airbnb, planning to keep the income rolling in while I figured out where to go. Then I sold the car, not wanting to leave a trace of my old life. Everything was a blur. Packing, selling, getting rid of everything that tied me to this place. By the time I boarded the plane and settled into my seat, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could outrun it. I'd put thousands of miles between myself and that nightmare in the woods. I could start over. But as the plane took off, The words scrawled in blood echoed in my mind, over and over again. The Omen will follow. They weren't going to let me go. And deep down, I knew. No matter where I ran, no matter where I hid, they would always find me. The town I'd chosen was about as far from home as I could get without leaving the country. A small, quiet place on the coast, just the right size to disappear in. The ocean stretched out endlessly beyond the cliffs, waves crashing against the rocky shore. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. I rented a small rustic cottage near the water, the kind of place no one looked twice at. The paint was peeling, the windows foggy from years of sea spray, but it felt safe, isolated. The nearest neighbor was a good mile away. After about 6 months, it felt like home. The air was fresh, salty, and cool, and I threw myself into a new routine to drown out the memories of what had happened. Working remotely made it easy to pretend that everything was normal, like the life I'd left behind wasn't eventually going to catch up with me. My days were spent in front of my laptop, answering emails, jumping on video calls, going through the motions. During my time here, I started long walks along the beach twice a day, trying to clear my mind. The sound of the waves was different from the forest, softer, more predictable. Nothing like the rustling trees or the crackling of that hellish bonfire. Here the wind was cool, the sand cold under my feet. The only other sounds were seagulls and the rhythmic wash of the tide. I was making my way back to the cottage after one of my evening walks when I saw it. I reached my cottage, and taped to the front door was an envelope. I stopped in my tracks, my heart plummeting into my stomach. It was smeared with something dark. Blood. I could smell it from where I stood, thick and metallic in the salty air. My hand shook as I tore it off the door, ripping open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a note, the letters jagged and smeared, written in blood. The Omen will follow. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My vision blurred as the words sunk in. They had found me. Somehow they'd followed me all the way across the country. I thought I'd escaped. The note crumpled in my fist, my knuckles white as I stumbled backward, scanning the street, the bushes, the darkening sky. The shadows stretched long across the empty road, the wind picking up as night fell. I was exposed out here, standing in the open like a fool. I made my way inside and packed. Everything I owned and needed fit in my rucksack and duffel bag. I couldn't bring myself to leave in the dark. So I left early the next morning after the sun came up. I emailed the cottage owner advising of my departure. I was paid up until the end of the month. I made my way to a car dealership 4 towns away, sold my car, and purchased another in cash. I'm on the road now. Not sure where I will end up, but all I know is I have to keep moving. It took them 6 months to find me. Maybe that gives me an idea of how long it's safe to stay in one place. I don't know. But what I do know is going for my walk that night was one of the worst mistakes of my life. I am making this Reddit post so there will be some kind of account of what happened to me. Most will dismiss this as a fanciful or delusional story. But there are a few of you who may believe and take heed to my story. If you know, you know. But for me, there is only one thing now I can be certain of from this point on. The Omen will follow.